How do we define the function of a chord? Within diatonic harmony, so if you take a major scale and build a chord using skips, you can do that 7 times, once for each note in the major scale. But how do you know whether chords are related in their function, whether they're going to sound similar or not, when one chord can be substituted for another and so on? Well, you have to know about their function. But how is that defined? So how I define function is by looking at a few things within the chord or mode or scale, however you want to look at it. So the first thing to look at is the chord tones, the first 4 chord tones. The second thing to look at is the lie tones, what I call the lie tones. So those are the notes that are not the first 4 chord tones in the bass quadrant, but they still sound good. So for example, if you play a C major 7, a D is going to sound good, although it's not a chord tone in that initial quadrant. It's still going to sound really good. The last thing that I would look at is what are the avoid notes. Okay, so in other words, what notes sound not so good? And if you have a hard time hearing which notes sound bad or maybe not as pleasant as the other categories, you can use this rule of thumb. If a note is a half step above one of those initial 4 chord tones, for example, an F on a C major, probably won't sound that good. Of course, there are lots of contexts in which you can make it sound good depending on how you voice it. And that doesn't mean you can never play an F on a C major. It just means it goes in this other category of notes, okay? Whether it sounds good or bad or how you can use it, that's really just subjective. But what's not necessarily subjective is how it relates to the chord. So again, to stress that point, if a note is a half step above one of the first 4 chord tones, it's categorized separately in the category that I just happen to call avoid tones. If we took the key of E flat as an example, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, and we looked at the very first sound in the key of E flat, starting on do. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. In that scale, in that mode, we're going to have the first 4 chord tones being do, mi, so, ti, E flat, G, B flat, D. And we're going to have a couple of lie tones being F, E flat, G, B flat, D, F. And then the next one above that is going to be an avoid tone. E flat, G, B flat, D, F, A flat. And the reason E flat, or the reason A flat is an avoid tone, again, is only because it's a half step above one of the first 4 chord tones we did. In this case, G. Okay, so that's why it's categorized as an avoid tone. That doesn't mean you can't play an A flat over an E flat. If you're playing certain styles, you'll just have to be careful about how you use it. It doesn't mean you can't come up with a chord voicing that has an A flat in it. It's just that because it's a half step above one of those first 4 chord tones, it's categorized separately. And then the last one, E flat, G, B flat, D, F, A flat, C. That C is also gonna sound pretty good over the bass of E flat major 7. Now, if you repeated that same process with the rest of the chord modes in the key of E flat, you're going to see a pattern emerge. You're going to see that some chords share chord tones, some share lie tones, and some share avoid notes. Just to give you an example, the one we just did, the very first sound in the key of E flat, has the avoid tone of A flat. Well, the sixth sound in the key of E flat, in other words, the sound starting on La, that has actually the same avoid tone, A flat. Reason being, because one of those first 4 chord tones is also a G, and therefore that A flat being a half step above the G counts as an avoid tone.